In Houston, Texas, there's one way that engineers express a valued relationship. They say a person is an engineering colleague. And I've known Tom for a number of years, and from my perspective, I value Thomas Rehm, a valued engineering colleague. Tom has a PhD, I believe, in chemical engineering. If not, he can correct me. He's a licensed professional engineer. He is the inaugural chair of AICHE, American Institute of Chemical Engineers Climate Solutions Community Organization. I first really knew Tom through his capacity when he was the current chair of the South Texas AICHE. AICHE have been very, I would say, active participants in the Engineering Council of Houston Society of, and their society supports the with money and manpower the Science Engineer Fair of Houston, as well as ECH. Tom has also, in addition to being a portion of the active founder and participant in the climate solutions community, which AICHE sponsored, he and others, some of which I think I see their face on the names on the screen, have come together and established what they refer to as the Global Climate Collaboration. And Tom will talk a little bit about that. His title, and I found that somewhat intriguing, is Climate Solutions, My Story. And most of us, all have a story. And it's a story that we believe in. And it's easily defendable because it's our story. So with that, let me turn the mic over to Tom Rehm.
Well, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it. So I pre-recorded my presentation. I can't do any better than the pre-recording, so I'm going to play it, and then I'll catch everybody on the other side and will answer your questions. So let me share my screen. Okay. And let me know if this looks okay when I share here. How's that look? Today, I'm going to tell you that look all right, Glenn?
Looks good.
My personal story with respect to global warming. Those of you who are younger than us baby boomers sometimes criticize us for not doing enough to solve this problem, which will devastate humanity if it is not addressed. Your criticism of me is very well founded. In my story today, I will confess that I was blissfully ignorant of the devastating effects of global warming until early 2017. I spent the first 66 years of my life deserving criticism for not doing anything about this problem. Today, I will describe several climate solution initiatives. I invite you to seriously consider engaging with me and my colleagues in one or more of these initiatives. They are the Climate Solutions Community, the Engineering, Science, and Technology Council of Houston, the Sustainable Energy Corps, the Climate Bonds Initiative, Global Climate Collaboration, and the ERCOT Industry Grid Reliability Collaboration. I turned 66 in December of 2016. On the first of that month, a chemical engineering professor posted this on the AICHE website, which invites discussion among AICHE members. He said, if there are to be solutions that most likely will be coming They most likely will be coming from the next generation of chemical engineers, and I do believe it is our responsibility to provide various worst-case scenarios regardless of our own bias. I began to carefully follow this discussion. I was blissfully unaware of global warming concepts for my first 66 years, so this was eye-opening to me. There were arguments on both sides of the issue. One argument against doing anything was that the atmosphere is already saturated with carbon dioxide to the point where additional carbon dioxide has no effect. The technical discussions supporting this argument and opposed to it were very interesting to follow. I was just a babe in the woods, learning new things. I followed the discussion from the sidelines, only an observer. After about 3 months, I came to 3 conclusions. Number one, I decided that there was something to the problem of global warming. Number two, the visceral attacks from chemical engineers on opposing sides were astonishing to me. And number three, I thought that we smart chemical engineers could probably make a significant contribution if we worked together. So I decided in late March 2017 to finally express my opinion. I know you can't read this, so let me make the yellow stuff a little larger. I asked if anyone would like to work with me and with AICHE National to try to figure out what ought to be done. As a retired guy, I wasn't concerned about corporate blowback. I suggested that AICHE could lead and invite other technical societies to join us. I thought this was a very reasonable request. After about an hour, my post was taken down. This made me really mad. So what did I do about it? Well, it turns out that 2 days later, I was going to drive to San Antonio for the AICHE spring meeting. I decided to ask chemical engineers at that meeting what they thought about global warming. I didn't ask anybody permission to take a survey, I just did it. I asked 2 simple questions. Do you think global warming is occurring? If you do you think global warming is primarily due to human activity? I arrived at the venue late afternoon of Sunday, March 26. I began my quest. I'm not shy, so it wasn't a big problem for me to ask a passing chemical engineer if they would take my survey. The results were very interesting. My survey form did provide a place for name, email address, and phone number, and most provided that information. I did later use that information to contact these engineers to see if anyone wanted to join me in my quest. Other than that, I haven't disclosed any of this information. This is page 1 of 3. Yes, I agree it is not a statistically significant survey. You can see from the page 1 responses that only one on this page did not think that global warming was occurring. Also interesting is that 2/3 on this page thought that human activity was the primary cause of global warming. Over Sunday evening, Monday, and Tuesday morning, I got 32 others to take my survey. The results were that 97% thought that global warming was occurring, and 76% thought it was primarily due to human activity. The second line of the 3rd page was completed by an engineer of around 60 years of age. When he realized what I was asking, he said, "This kind of thing can come back to bite you." He was the second person to say that to me. He indicated that he thought global warming was occurring, but did not think it was due to human activity. He had a young engineer with him, around 30 years of age, who was the last person to complete my survey. I decided at that point that I had enough information to satisfy my curiosity. Even though many chemical engineers work in oil drilling and production, oil refining, and petrochemicals, from my survey, it appears that almost everyone thinks that global warming is occurring. and that the vast majority think it is due to human activity. Soon after I returned home from the AICHE spring meeting, I was called by a member of the leadership of the AICHE Public Affairs and Information Committee, which is the body concerned about AICHE policy and that sort of thing. My first thought was I was being called on the carpet. Well, I was wrong. They invited me to join an AICHE climate task force. From April to July of 2017, I was involved in planning a series of discussions which were held on the AICHE Engage platform. I was one of two moderators for the first two discussions. Some of the same contributors to the discussion from late December 2016 to March 2017 jumped into these discussions. Other people also joined. So what resulted from these series of discussions? About a year after closing out the work of the task force, the AICHE policy on climate change was revised. Also, the AICHE Board of Directors approved a proposal to establish the Climate Solutions Community. The June 2014 AICHE policy on climate change said that AICHE does not plan to make any statements assessing the extent or cause of climate change. The next revision of the policy statement in March 2019 included the statement that climate change is occurring and has been strongly influenced by human-caused releases of greenhouse gases. In 2016 and 2017, I served as an officer of the AICHE South Texas section. In September 2017, a section past chair said he wanted to nominate me to run for 2018 chair-elect. I told him I would do so, but I would be running on doing something about global warming. This was a paragraph from my campaign pitch. I was running against the chair of the 2017 Young Professionals, who was a likable, popular engineer in his 30s. To my surprise, I was elected with about 70% of the vote. I devoted half of our 2019 section dinners to global warming. These were the four speakers. 3 of them are now working with me and colleagues on 2 of the initiatives that I will discuss today. When the Climate Task Force finished its work in 2018, one of my colleagues, Neil Yeoman, a 2-time AICHE director, served for 6 years, asked me a pertinent question. Tom, now what do we do? Neil had connections that I didn't have, so he pulled 2 significant AICHE leaders into a discussion on what to do. Darlene Schuster is the executive director of the AICHE Institute for Sustainability. Dale Kearns is the chair of the AICHE Center for Energy Initiatives. He was also the 2008 AICHE president. For 3 months, we held weekly phone calls. The end result was a proposal for formation of the Climate Solutions Community. The pertinent bit was our vision and mission. We intended to determine technically feasible and economically viable solutions to mitigate and/or adapt to climate change by collaborating with applicable fields of engineering and science and development of solutions. I'm going to get into the launch of the Climate Solutions Community, but first I want to take a little diversion. Sometime in early 2018, a colleague of mine in Texas was worried about my focus on global warming. So in an attempt to caution me, he said, Tom, it's always been hot in Texas. Nothing's changed. I thought, well, he may have a point. I first moved to Texas in 1993, and it was hot back then. And I wondered if Texas had gotten hotter. So I started pulling up temperature data from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'm going to show you some results. I pulled up data for 12 Texas meteorological stations. For each station, I plotted the NOAA monthly mean temperatures. I thought that from one year to the next, it would be more precise if I looked at the changes for each month instead of an annual average. This is Dickinson, Texas, which is southeast of Houston. Now, I am not a statistician, so I'm sure that some fault can be found in my analysis. I tried to find stations that were still operational and had 20 to 30 years of data. For each linear fit, I determined the standard deviation and then compared the change in temperature from the linear fit to the standard deviation. For January, February, May, and December, the change in temperature in Dickinson was less per their linear fits than the value of one standard deviation. To me, this indicates there really wasn't a trend. For June, July, and August, the change in temperature was more than double the value of their standard deviations. To me, this was more statistically significant. The change in temperature for the other months were between one value of the standard deviation and twice that value. So this is what I did for all 12 meteorological stations. Now I will show you the results from all 12. On the bottom of this slide, I've reproduced 3 monthly plots from the Dickinson data. I've made the y-axis identical for each plot so that it's easier to see how the data is a little tighter in the plot on the right. As I mentioned, the upper right numbers on each inset plot is a comparison between temperature change using the linear fit and the standard deviation of that linear fit. With these 3 categories, I tabulated the results from all 12 meteorological stations and concluded that, well, I guess it is getting hotter in Texas. In mid-2018, I made a presentation at an engineering networking lunch. I included these results. Later in 2018, a major climate assessment report hit the news in the US. Volume 2 of the 4th National Climate Assessment Report was issued in November 2018. This is the first figure in the executive summary. We could talk about several features of this figure, but we don't have the time to do it. I want to focus on the last 50 years. When this report came out, there was criticism of the apparent amazing increase in temperature in the last 50 years. Can this really be true? Or is there some chicanery afoot? Last month, I thought I should take another look at Texas temperature data. It had been more than 3 years since I first took a look at Texas temperatures. I wondered, how have temperatures changed in Texas over the last 50 years? I went back to the NOAA database and found to my astonishment that there are a lot more than 12 meteorological stations in Texas. There are actually 1,975. I then felt guilty in my 2018 analyses, almost like I could have been accused of cherry picking. So last month I decided to correct my mistake. I went through a compilation of all of these stations, looking at when they started collecting data, and I discovered that 250 of them began recording data on or before 1965. The rest of them were made operational after that period. So 250 of them had at least 50 years of data. I went through those 250, looking at their data, and found that 134 of them had data spanning the mid-1960s all the way through to the mid to late 2010s. The other 115 either had a large gap with no data at the start of that 50-year period or at the end, and so they really weren't usable. So I only had 134 meteorological stations to plot. I decided that doing monthly plots for 134 stations was too much. Even for an old retired guy like me, I just didn't have time to do it. So I decided to plot yearly mean temperatures. Even with that, I was only able to get 24 stations plotted before this meeting today. I fully intend to plot all 134 stations and write an article with those results. Today, I'm going to run through the 24. The 24 stations are tabulated here. I downloaded NOAA data for all of them. You're welcome to that data. Just send me an email, tom@tomrehm.com, and I'll send you the data. Or I'll give you the NOAA link so you can look it up yourself. They're all in PDF files. You can reproduce everything that I'll show you today. For this analysis, I decided to calculate R² and use it as a measure of the statistical significance of the linear fit of each set of data. In this table, I've sorted the results of the 24 meteorological stations by R². I also show the calculated temperature change over a 50-year period using the linear fit for each set of data. The yellow numbers exceed the 1.6 degree Fahrenheit temperature change shown in Figure 1 of Volume 2 of the National Climate Assessment Report. 2 stations show cooling per their linear fits. The 2 stations with the best statistical fits per their R² numbers were the Bush Intercontinental Airport and San Marcos. I think it's obvious that the temperature at these stations show a marked increase. You can even see it with your own lying eyes. The linear fit for both show an increase of more than 3 degrees Fahrenheit over 50 years. Now I'm going to run through the other 22 stations, going through them down through the list from largest R² values in descending order. Del Rio and Laredo are getting hotter at about a 3 degree Fahrenheit temperature increase over 50 years. Junction, Kimball, and Tahoka are getting hotter at about a 3 degree Fahrenheit temperature increase over 50 years. Big Lake and Gatesville, we're still looking at a 3 degree increase. Hereford and Houston Hobby, now we're looking at about a 2.5 degree increase. Port Arthur and Rockport, Lexington and Panther Junction, Austin Airport and Anson. Anson is apparently cooling off. Bay City and Sherman, Dumas and Bardwell, Follett and Columbus. As we've gone down the R² column, the data is looking more and more like scattershot. Bravo and Brenham. Bravo is the other town that's cooling off. These 2 sets of data had the worst R² numbers, both under 0.05. Certainly, these are unusable scattershot data, meaningless. By comparison, these are the 2 stations with the best R² numbers. I've come to the conclusion, for the second time now in 3 years, that Texas is getting hotter. Now I'm going to return to the story I was telling you before. In September 2018, I, Neil Yeoman, Darlene Schuster, and Dale Kearns put a proposal forward for the formation of the Climate Solutions Community. In October 2018, at the AICHE annual meeting in Pittsburgh, the board of directors considered our proposal and approved it. The community was announced by press release on March 31, 2019. These are excerpts from the press release. Of significance are the following. The community will be a global collaboration. It will be interdisciplinary, and it will work to develop a portfolio of technical and government policy solutions necessary to address both industrial and societal challenges related to climate. It's not easy to move the needle on climate solutions. After the March 2019 press release, our community steering committee met every week. After the first meeting, a prominent individual in AICHE leadership seemed concerned about my confidence that the community would become active in 2019. On a private call to me after that meeting, this person told me, "Tom, it's going to take at least 5 years to get the community up and running." That was stunning to me. We, of course, don't have 5 years to waste. I'll make a long story short. My nature is I will push as much as I dare. We have to push the envelope in every direction. Sometimes pushing creates results. In late 2019, I was joined by Mark Holtzapfel. He and I arranged a meeting, a breakfast meeting at the AICHE annual meeting in Orlando in November of 2019 with the 2020 AICHE President Monty Alger. As you can see, Mark is now the chair of the community and Monty is the vice chair. These are positions that will remain in place through the end of 2022. With Mark's and Monty's help, we have shortened the 5 years to 2 years. The managing board was approved by the AICHE Board of Directors last fall, and our bylaws are now under a review and approval process. About the time I was getting discouraged from advice that it would take at least 5 years to get the community up and running, I was invited to describe my climate solution interests to the board of the Engineering, Science, and Technology Council of Houston. At that meeting, I received support from the ECH board to hold a 2020 Climate Solution Symposium. We had almost 300 register for our August virtual symposium. Each speaker is a recognized expert in their field. I highly recommend that you view the presentations. Every presentation is on the ECH site. In your browser, if you enter ECH Houston Symposium, you will find it. During this symposium, there were more than 100, I think 120 questions that were posed, and the panelists answered those questions. So there's a lot of information on this page in the ECH website. Following this symposium, I and several colleagues discussed both the slow pace of progress being made in bringing the climate solutions community to life, and the fact that that community will be limited to engagement between engineering and scientific institutes and societies. I wondered that perhaps we should have a wider collaboration. So 2 months later, I invited 100 colleagues to join me at a climate collaboration workshop. We focused our discussion on 3 essential fundamentals. The need to maintain strong national economies and bringing 1 to 2 billion people out of energy poverty during the transition to carbon neutral energy, and finding the money to solve the problem. A lot of money is being spent worldwide now, but we're not making any progress. So we're going to have to spend many, many, many trillions of dollars every year globally to solve this problem. Where are we going to find the money to do it? There are many problems that can trip us up. In my view, this is perhaps the greatest problem. If we don't figure out how to bring billions out of energy poverty, we are going to fail. At the workshop, we had some very good breakout sessions and came away with lots of ideas. Following the workshop, I began serious discussions with Dick Hutchinson. Dick is another retired chemical engineer. He and I had been communicating for about a year on his proposal that the wicked problem approach should be used to figure out the best combinations of climate solutions regionally and nationally. Over the remainder of 2020, Dick and I organized a plan for him to present his ideas in webinars in early 2021. Several dozen attended webinars in January through April. Following the last webinar in mid-April, Dick and I and 30 colleagues had been working to develop the initiative Global Climate Collaboration. If you go to our website, you can hear our welcome message and an overview of our objectives. There's a lot of detail on our website. On the team page, several of the founders provide testimonials in support of this initiative. There are dozens, perhaps over 100 climate solution puzzle pieces. Which of these are going to work? Does anyone really know? You can go to a book like Drawdown to read about a lot of these puzzle pieces. Decision-making on policy setting and funding climate solutions are now heavily and detrimentally influenced by public passions, vested interests, both corporate and career, and political agendas. The wicked problem approach can cut through these human biases. Dr. Dick Hutchinson headed a project in the early 1990s for the U.S. Army to determine the preparedness needed in the United States to protect ourselves from biological and chemical terrorism. They use the wicked problem approach. We haven't found any other applications of it to date. To apply the concept of the wicked problem approach, we are proposing a project called Global Solutions and Outreach Programs. This is our development committee. Members of the committee are now working on developing marketing plans for 4 impact sectors. An impact sector is defined as a sector of society, industry, and/or markets that is being or will be affected by climate change. Upon completing marketing plans for these 4 sectors, we will begin marketing the global solutions and outreach programs to them and begin developing marketing plans for other sectors. We have a lot of work to do. If you want to help, contact me at tom@tomrehm.com. Now I'm going to briefly mention 3 other initiatives and then close out my remarks. When Mark Holtzapfel and I met with Monty Alger in November 2019, Monty proposed an initiative to be led by university students. He called it the Sustainable Energy Corps. This title being modeled after President Kennedy's Peace Corps. Initial funding was approved by the AICHE Foundation in 2020 to conduct a brainstorming workshop, which was held in 2021. In Monty's vision, 1 million students will be engaged worldwide, working with industry to focus on mitigating our worst industrial emission points. Early last year, I was invited to join the Basic Chemicals Technical Working Group for the Climate Bonds Initiative. This initiative began in 2007 with the concept that climate solutions, which have the greatest potential to reduce emissions, should be incentivized in the bonds market. This is a European initiative. We don't have this concept in the United States. From its early days, they knew that a very challenging sector would be chemical manufacturing. 90% of the feedstocks for chemical manufacturing come from oil and gas. Most of the products we purchase in our lives are produced from chemicals. This is a real dilemma that we have to face. How are we going to transition away from oil and gas? Our technical working group completed its assignment last month. we will be meeting in the first quarter of this year with the Financial Industry Working Group, which are finance experts rather than engineers, to present our recommendations on criteria to approve green bond certification for chemical manufacturing projects. We can use this model in the United States. We should use this model in the United States. Many of you suffered through the 2021 winter storm Uri. Following that tragic event, I began talking with colleagues about ERCOT grid reliability and how industry could perhaps work with ERCOT to figure out how to improve the reliability of our Texas grid. This is a planning group that formed around those early conversations. Our primary thoughts are, how do we improve the reliability of electrical power to the society in Texas as a whole, but with a focus on industry? How do we prevent major losses in the industrial sector? We haven't made as much progress as we would like. Part of this is due to, I think, some problems in the Texas legislature. If you would like to join us in figuring out how industry can improve or help to improve the ERCOT grid, please contact me at tom@tomrehm.com. Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right, Glenn. So I guess maybe, should I stop sharing and then we can go into a Q&A?
Yes, that probably just work out. So
Okay.
I guess you need to use the chat button or just
Well, let's see.
or just call out.
I have a comment.
Yes, Jane.
Tom, you might want to look for a report or reports that shows rainfall patterns in Texas over time. There's a desertification report somewhere that shows vertical stripes of rainfall, and those have been slowly marching eastward with time. Now, I saw that report once and I haven't been able to find it since.
Okay.
It's evidence that maybe the state is drying out a bit.
All right. Well, that'll be interesting. I could add that to my temperature data. Anybody have any questions about any of the initiatives I talked about?
I was going to suggest that you use the raise hand function in reactions if you want to talk, just so that we can do it, you know, in a good way, or raise your hand in your video, and so we can call on you. So that was a wonderful, wonderful talk.
Well, Gene, it looks like we're going to get to you quicker than we thought.
Well, I have another comment, Tom.
Okay.
It's related to your presentation.
Yeah.
You said your realization of climate change was 2017.
Yeah.
I had my realization in 2005 when I read a children's National Geographic story about a guy named Conrad Steffen on Greenland's ice, talking about cracks and lakes forming. And before that, I had done my own calculations that Greenland's ice would last at least 500 years. But here was a new mechanism of water melt on the surface. By the way, this didn't start until 2000, the water melting on the surface. And Conrad was the first scientist to report this. And it sort of caught the scientific community by surprise. But what happens is a crack forms under this water and it goes whoosh down to bedrock. So the water on the surface goes down and stays there. It doesn't refreeze. So the Greenland is building up more and more water. Now, a lot of this water is oozing out underneath the ice to the ocean. But this last year fell into an ice hole and whoosh.
Gosh.
So yeah, that was kind of a shock to the community. But I did some ice melting curves with Excel, and if the acceleration of melting continues at 6 to 8%, my calculations showed that Greenland would be gone by 2100 with a 22-foot ocean rise. That's just a spreadsheet calculation. I showed that to Jim Hansen, and he moved his curves a little sooner.
What year did you mention?
In 2005, the National Geographic Children's Magazine had this article, and I'm
asking, the rise is going to occur when?
Well, just a simple spreadsheet, somewhere around 2100, maybe earlier. Depends on how fast the melting accelerates. It's kind of an S curve. I don't know exactly when it is, but it's much faster than what anybody else was predicting. But now we're getting evidence of, accelerated melting and all that. So it's sort of fitting the original spreadsheet.
Is that also occurring down in the Antarctic at least?
Yes, it is. Antarctica's losing almost the same amount of water, but it's a different mechanism.
Oh.
The ocean's coming in under the ice.
Yeah.
And it melts from below. And there's articles on that. They're watching that closely, and it's also melting.
All right.
I have a comment for Carolyn.
Yeah.
Those were fantastic videos. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to have to come over there and watch that. That's great. But I'm also look at astronomy closely. That's another hobby. And this past week, astronomers announced for the first time ever that 2 merged black holes were observed. After they merged, the black hole took off with a high rate of speed. And I thought, wait a minute, doesn't that violate the conservation of momentum? I have a friend, Bill, in Dallas, and he says, no, Gene, the nonlinearities of general relativity and all that, blah, 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 can result in a lopsided merger. And the final resulting black hole, half the energy goes off as a wave, and the other half the energy kicks the black hole, and it can kick it right out of the galaxy. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. Well, that proves that we can use, if we ever understood gravity, we could use gravity as a space drive, couldn't we? So this is a little bit beyond the physics of what you're normally used to looking at. But I mean, the astronomers observed it, and it's not fiction.
I have a comment on Greenland. Greenland, since we've had radar to look at the bedrock, is one giant glacier that goes out to the sea on the north side of Greenland. And what you're seeing is, as the sea ice is melting, that's freeing up those outlets to the sea. And the outlets to the sea are below sea level. So the warm water in the Arctic, warm salt water, is attacking those glaciers from below. And I would think that warm salt water melts glaciers much faster than surface melt. And most of the prejudice in glaciology is by people in high mountains looking at glaciers, where surface melt is very important. But if the sea is coming in underneath, it's going to melt that glacier much more efficiently than surface melt. That was it.
Anybody else before I introduce Gene?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, Tom, this is Larry Howell. Hey, great presentation. Enjoyed the talk. With regard to financing, I've come across a couple of books recently, one Bill Gates book, and then one more recently called Speed and Scale by John Durer, who's a venture capitalist. When you guys get to financing, are you trying to tap any of those large source of funds, or what's your ideas around that?
Well, right now, we are the most optimistic about the insurance sector because the insurance industry is exposed to a lot of risk associated with climate change. And you can just search on the internet. You can find evidence of that in webinars they've held and papers that have written. So they are very concerned. And so we think that we have an opportunity there. Governments, we're kind of cautiously optimistic, hoping that maybe at least now people are putting a lot of money into budgets at the federal level or to address global warming, and maybe not all of that has been pigeonholed. Anyway, it might be a far-fetched hope there. In philanthropies, we're actually working down the Forbes list of 400. Can you believe the 400th richest person in the U.S. has about $4 billion? Anyway,
Yeah, that's why I was thinking with Bill Gates and John Doerr, they may be part of that philanthropist opportunity.
Quite a few of them are concerned about global warming. So, you know, they could push a little money our way. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. May I make a comment
Yes.
from the Netherlands? Because, well, one thing that you don't have yet, but it may come, and therefore it is perhaps some kind of warning. The population at large is switching from zero, that is no action, whatever the climate concerns, to one, and they don't take something in the middle. I mean, we cannot change the energy transition. We cannot change it overnight, and so you need some time to still tolerate older technologies, and that is that can become a problem because people all of a sudden says no natural gas anymore. Okay, well, you cannot do that overnight. It is impossible. And natural gas is, of course, one of the fuels that produces the lowest carbon dioxide relative to others. So yes, well, it is just something that you keep in mind, that it has to, let's say, the information flow to the people at large has to be kind of,
Yes, there's a lot of passion within the public who want to solve this problem, but it's a very complex problem. And how we transition to carbon neutral energy, if we don't do it right, we can throw a wrench into a lot of national economies.
yes, yes.
And when politicians are trying to get reelected by the whims of the public, I mean, we have a recipe for disaster unless we figure out how to do this a little more sensibly.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah.
One thing that Texas had last year, and I'm hoping it's still continuing into this year, is that if you put a solar panel on your house, you can, pay for it with very low interest rates at whatever you were paying for electricity. Here's my cat. And give incentives to putting solar panels on homes. And I think one of the nice things about living in Texas is we have the light resource when we need it in the summertime. Since we don't need as much heating in the winter, except this last February, we don't need as much heating in the winter as we do cooling in the summer.
Except during Storm Uri.
So I always tell people I'm pro-nuclear. I don't think we can solve the problem without a significant increase in nuclear, but we need all the solutions. And Gene has solar panels. He has Tesla. You're probably going to tell him a little bit about that. But anyway, we need all solutions.
Yeah, and too many solar panels is also counterproductive because the grid is not designed for it. So there is now in Netherlands at least the plan to invest billions in enlarging the grid because at a lot of places already it was saturated. And if you install solar panels, it is not paying anymore.
Hans, do you have hydro storage?
Sorry?
Do you have hydro storage, storage, energy storage in?
Yeah, well, no, not hydro, but of course there is a very active program on hydrogen.
Okay.
Yeah, because they see that as to store energy, but also the transition of the chemical industry will need a lot of hydrogen.
I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the very end of my talk.
Well, you're going to start talking pretty soon because we're 3 minutes past my time. So I'm going to introduce you, Gene.